where to begin tonight on the provocative topic of what's the deal with this IQ thing, eh? All right, so earlier tonight, I made a comment about Trump's intelligence. I didn't use the word IQ, but I said his intelligence. A derisive comment about his intelligence, you might say. I was told that, in fact, he had quite high intelligence because, after all, he was leader of the free world and most powerful man in the world, quote unquote, and that was indicative that he was certainly more intelligent than me because he was so much, he was president, and who was that, Well, I would say that it was probably wrong of me to condemn the man for a lack of intelligence because, like all attributional personality traits, it's normative and it's not something that you can change. So if you tell people that intelligence is important or IQ is important, you're saying you are what you are, and you will be evaluated as such regardless of what you do or say or how intelligently you present what you're presenting. And it seems to me that IQ therefore affords an illegitimate legitimacy. In other words, it affords an unearned legitimacy. So Jordan Peterson is somebody who talks a lot about the importance of IQ, right? He's also somebody who claims to have an IQ of 160 something, I believe. 160 something is his purported IQ. I self-sourced, I believe. So what are we to take from that? Are we to afford him additional correctness on those grounds alone? It would seem to me that I certainly am not 160 IQ or anything like that. Does that mean that Jordan Peterson is more correct than I am about anything? Where we disagree? No. He's patently wrong and says a lot of absurd things that are unsubstantiatable and represent poor thinking. And I don't think it's fair to say that I can be accused of the same. So what's the purpose of the intelligence then, the IQ? Is it just to say that, well, I nevertheless am inferior to Jordan Peterson in some way? Or if it's not about wrongness, right? Like, I don't think many people who would insist that Jordan Peterson is a lot smarter than me would insist he's a lot more correct than I am. They'd have trouble articulating those things. But people take great offense at the idea that I might present myself as more correct than him. After all, who am I? And he's Jordan Peterson. This is one of the frustrations that comes along with personality traits being perceived as attributes, which necessarily will attain a normative kind of frame of reference. Smart is good, dumb is bad. Somebody who has a high IQ is inherently more legitimate source, I suppose, than somebody with a low IQ. I mean, these are sort of conclusions that are inevitable if you if you ascribe to these possessed trait metaphors of personality. People don't possess traits so much as they habitually attend and behave as themselves. When you talk about IQ, what are you really doing? You're affording unearned legitimacy or unearned illegitimacy to a given person. Jordan Peterson, again, is the first example. He claims to have an IQ of 160 something. But where he and I disagree, I am right and he is wrong. I can find plenty of things that he said that I can successfully negate. He avoids the substantial issues about personality. He embraces the metaphor of an attribute for process-based entities, which are human beings, he also says some very smart things. But the point is, if in fact IQ is so important, then why isn't he always right when he disagrees with me? And I've yet to encounter anybody who can convincingly explain why he's right where I'm making a case that he's wrong. I've yet to be successfully negated in that case making. So the other factor is this: it's very frustrating to me how important it is to so many people that my IQ be both determined and not particularly high, right? It's like everybody's desperate to make sure that I understand that I'm no genius, Well, I don't claim to be a genius. I never said I'm the smartest guy in the world, It's like, of course, it really depends on how you define intelligence. That's the other thing, right? I do think that there are aspects of your personality that relate to what one would call various intelligences. Some of them can be properly deemed intelligences, and some of them really ought to be deemed something else. There's spatial intelligence, which involves how shapes relate to each other in space and stuff like that. I'm quite poor at that. There's verbal reasoning. I'm quite strong at that. There are other things that get tested as well, like pattern recognition that goes beyond just TI. It's more of an intuition thing. I'm not necessarily that great at that. IQ tests, I guess, don't really measure creativity. They don't measure the putting part of the process, which is where I'm strongest. If they did measure that and prioritize that, like, say, capacity to improvise complete things and with no prep or limited prep, I'd score very high, So it's like people seem determined to, people like to limit me to some extent, to say like, you better not get the wrong idea, Eric, about how smart you are or something like that. People really, they can't stand the FE violation of somebody claiming to be smart or special or different or more right or anything like that. It's weird. Caring a lot about IQ and talking about how it correlates with success is double missing the point, in my opinion. It's missing the point on the first hand by saying that there's a personality trait that you can possess as a status that's meaningfully used to understand anything, even if it does correlate more strongly with success. So what? You could be super genius and totally unsuccessful. It doesn't do you any good at that point that it correlates more with success, right? It just makes you feel bad about yourself. Not only am I smart and not successful, but that makes me like the weakest end of smart people, the small end of smart people who aren't successful. It's just depressing, frankly, But the biggest point is, it's like prioritizing a sort of random set of skills and saying this comprises intelligence, or a IQ score that we shorthand for intelligence, is silly and regressive in some sense. Like, it moves us further away from the truth